Welcome back.
Welcome back, family, to Hear Us Out. I'm Renee.
How are you?
And as always, thank you so much for hearing us out. And to our longtime subscribers, of course, thank you so much. And to our new listeners, make sure to hit subscribe so that you can continue to get notifications and to hear us out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And today we will be continuing
Mm-hmm.
our reading of W.E.B. Du Bois's of the Souls of Black Folks.
Right.
And like in our last episode, it was of the Wings of Atlanta,
Uh-huh.
right, where he talked about the you could say perversion of ideals that comes with the pursuit of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And how this thing can twist the highest of aspirations into malicious, intents.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about that. We went back and forth about it. Not really about the point. Not really if he was right or wrong.
Right.
It's
Of
not really,
course. Of course.
up for debate, at least from our perspective.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But the point of contention came from what are we changing from? What is this supposed to be replacing?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything for this perversion to replace, or
Mm-hmm.
was it already perverted?
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the big sticking point is that wealth does cause, can cause a conflation of goals, and that
Mm-hmm.
if the pursuit of wealth becomes the point and not just something that is incidental, that is not something that's just along the way, if you conflate the two, then you can cause a something of a backward spiral, of a regression,
Right.
where everything is kind of pulled down and made limited by this pursuit,
Right.
tireless, endless pursuit.
Right. If your goal, if your number one issue is wealth, then you will do almost anything. You will manipulate almost anything in order to achieve that particular aim. And so for Du Bois, and I think even for me, is that it's about being able to live, having a full life. And like he mentioned, and just like you said, if you were, to become, wealthy or whatever, those type of things that falls into that, well, that's something different than the game. The it's all about wealth. And so yeah,
So yeah, and in this chapter we're gonna see another way he, you know,
oh, he
another
doesn't
way.
play with this one.
Yeah,
I feel like in the previous chapter that we read, that at least for me, I found myself, interpreting things, the way that I internalize and interpret it. But for this here, I feel like it's pretty straightforward. I don't think there isn't
there's
much
no
that
need
he's.
for
Yeah,
interpretation.
yeah. There's no need for interpret. I mean, yeah. There's no need for
Yeah,
interpretation.
so
He's
let's
pretty much
just yeah,
straightforward. Yeah.
let's jump right into it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Of the training of black men. Why, if the soul can fling the dust aside, and naked on the air of heaven ride, were it not a shame for him, in this clay carcass crippled to abide. From the shimmering swirl of waters, where many, many thoughts ago the slave ship first saw the square tower of Jamestown, have flowed down to our day three streams of thinking, one swollen from the larger world here and overseas, saying the multiplying of human wants in culture lands calls for the worldwide cooperation of men in satisfying them. Hence arises a new human unity, pulling the ends of earth nearer, and all men, black, yellow, and white. The larger humanity strives to feel in the contact of living nations and sleeping hordes a thrill of new life in the world, crying, if the contact of life and sleep be death, shame on such life. To be sure, behind this thought lurks the afterthought of force and dominion, the making of brown men to delve when the temptations of beads and red calico cloys. The second thought streaming from the death ship and the curving river is the thought of the older South, the sincere and passionate belief that somewhere between men and cattle, God created a tertium quid and called it a Negro, a clownish, simple creature, at times even lovable within its limitations, but straightly foreordained to walk within the veil. To be sure, behind the thought lurks the afterthought. Some of them with favoring chance might become men, but in sheer self-defense we dare not let them, and we build about them walls so high, and hang between them and the light a veil so thick that they shall not even think of breaking through. And last of all, there trickles down that third and darker thought, the thought of the things themselves, the confused, half-conscious mutter of men who are black and whitened, crying liberty, freedom, opportunity, vouchsafe to us, O boastful world, the chance of living men. To be sure, behind the thought lurks the afterthought. Suppose, after all, the world is right and we are less than men. Suppose this mad impulse within us all wrong, some mock mirage from the untrue. So here we stand, among thoughts of human unity, even through conquest and slavery, the inferiority of black men, even if forced by fraud, a shriek in the night for the freedom of men who themselves are not yet sure of their right to demand it. This is the tangle of thought and afterthought wherein we are called to solve the problem of training men for life. So now we have come to our thesis. Most of the time, a thesis is a sentence long. The thesis here is a few paragraphs,
right?
Because
he has to get to it, right?
He's outlining the three dominant lines of thinking that came with and out of enslavement. And he kind of likens it to this whole process starting from the very first slave ship coming to Jamestown, to America. And there's three lines of thought, which I've laid out as the humanist view, the white man's view, and the black man's view.
Right.
And so the humanist view is the one where, we all pull, kind of group and cooperate together to ensure all of our happiness in this system. Whereas the white man's view is that our happiness is contingent on certain people staying
in
particular places, and that the Negro is meant to occupy a lower role in the caste than them. Whereas the black man's view is that I want freedom, I want liberty, I want all these things, but am I worthy of it?
Right.
Do I deserve it?
Right.
Do I even have what it takes to exist in this new system? Do I even have it in me to even ask for these things? When your inferiority is systematic, when all these things fall on to you, it is only natural after a while, after generations of existence, to question yourself.
That's right.
And now these three trains of thought are the largest, you could say, these three trains of thought are the largest hurdles when trying to address the question of how to train men for life. How will you train them? What is the thesis, of their life statement? Will it be the humanist, the white, or the black? Which one? And how do you even go about implementing these things? Just in teaching.
Right.
So yeah. Let's continue. Behind all its curiousness, so attractive alike to sage and dilettante, lie its dim dangers, throwing across us shadows at once grotesque and awful. Plain it is to us that what the world seeks through desert and wild, while we have within our threshold a stalwart laboring force, suited to the semi-tropics, if deaf to the voice of the zeitgeist. We refuse to use and develop these men. We risk poverty and loss. If, on the other hand, seizured by the brutal afterthought, we debauch the race thus caught in our talons, selfishly sucking their blood and brains in the future as in the past, what shall save us from national decadence? Only that saner selfishness which education teaches men can find the rights of all in the world of work. So yeah, I like this little because I think this paragraph highlights the world we're living in now. This world of denial and not actually addressing the situation, which has led to decadence.
Right.
Like I said, the wealth gap has grown. Has grown even since Martin Luther King was alive. It's grown worse.
Yes.
The divide has grown worse, quote unquote. And the people on high have gotten higher. The decadence,
Mm-hmm.
is weighing down the moral questions and the social implications
Mm-hmm.
of what it means, to be what he calls to be a man,
Right.
but to be a human being,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think just that line of phrasing and that
Mm-hmm.
one little paragraph elucidates all of that in
Mm-hmm.
such, in a way that only someone like a W. Du Bois can.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we may decry the color prejudice of the South, yet it remains a heavy fact. Such curious kinks of the human mind exist and must be reckoned with soberly. They cannot be laughed away, nor always successfully stormed at, nor easily abolished by act of legislature. And yet they must not be encouraged by being let alone. They must be recognized as facts, but unpleasant facts, things that stand in the way of civilization and religion and common decency. They can be met in but one way, by the breadth and broadening of human reasoning, by the catholicity of taste and culture. And so too the native ambition and aspiration of men, even though they be black, backward, and ungraceful, must not lightly be dealt with. To stimulate wildly weak and untrained minds is to play with mighty fires. To flout their striving idly is to welcome a harvest of brutish crime and shameless lethargy. In our very lapse, the guiding of thought and the deft coordination of deed is at once the path of honor and humanity. Yeah, well, nothing to argue with that.
Yes.
Mhm. Racism
That's right.
must be taken seriously.
Seriously.
You can't laugh it away. You can't
Mm-hmm.
legislate it.
That's right.
This is more than just a systemic problem. It is a social issue. It is like I said, it is a mental illness as far
Right.
as I'm concerned.
And how is it that you can even attempt to try to get rid of this disease, this psychosis, this problem? You can only do it by way of human reason.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be educated out of
You
this.
have to be able to think.
You have to think your way out of this. The fighting, hey, you, like I said, this is from 1903. Hey, there was.
Right out of a fight.
We're right out of a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Right out of a fight.
Of a
here,
fight, not
yes,
not a
yeah,
hyperbolic fight. A real
yeah, a
live
real live
war fight.
Right, war. You're fresh out of that, and you're still dealing with folk who think a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
That is still that is leading to,
and it's only exacerbated
the problems that we are facing.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that it's on. We see that they have to be taught that you have to think a different way.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think another way.
I think about how we used to say that solving their psychosis is not our problem, right?
Yep.
And I remember being like,
yeah.
I don't think I can necessarily agree with that,
Mm-hmm.
mainly because it's become the problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's become all of our issues, and the only way for us to get out of our predicament
Mm-hmm.
is to deal with that psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it even here.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, W.E.B. Du Bois was grappling,
right,
and dealing with that fact about what it means to actually strive against this.
Right. But I don't think necessarily when I make that statement, because I've said it many times, I don't think that the onus is necessarily on us, and maybe I'm looking at it too
the onus, like I said, the onus falls on those who know better. On those who actually can see what the issue who are actually having the honest conversation about this.
Right.
So if we know, like you said, if you know better, do better.
Do better.
So if we know how this perpetuates, if we know what this is, then
we have to be,
you have to be
teachers of the world, right?
Yeah.
teachers of the world. Once you acknowledge it, you are responsible for it. And so, but the work is not. It's not one-sided, and I think we'll get into that later, because I got a feeling that I'm gonna have a Dr. King quote coming up. So let's keep going. Right.
All right. Let's continue.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in this great question of reconciling three vast and partially contradictory streams of thought, the one panacea of education leaps to the lips of all. Such human training as will best use the labor of all men without enslaving or brutalizing. Such training as will give us poise to encourage the prejudices that bulwark society, and stamp out those that in sheer barbarity deafen us to the wail of prisoned souls within the veil and the mounting fury of shackled men. But when we have vaguely said that education will set this tangle straight, what have we uttered but a truism? Training for life teaches living, but what training for the profitable living together of black men and white? 150 years ago, our task would have seemed easier. Then Dr. Johnson blandly assured us that education was needful solely for the embellishment of life and was useless for ordinary vermin. Today we have climbed to heights where we would open at least the outer courts of knowledge to all, display its treasures to many, and select a few to whom its mystery of truth is revealed, not wholly by birth or the accident of the stock market, but at least in part according to deftness and aim, talent and character. This program, however, we are solely puzzled in carrying out through that part of the land where the blight of slavery fell hardest, and where we are dealing with two backward peoples to make here in human education that ever necessary combination of the permanent and the contingent, of the ideal and the practical, in workable equilibrium, has been there, as it ever must be in every age and place, and a matter of frequent experiment and frequent mistakes. Infinite
Yeah, I'm
experiment
about to
and
say I
frequent
have
mistakes.
infinite, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that is something that we touched
Talked
upon
about, yeah.
in our anarchy episodes
Hmm.
and talking about anarchy, about the prefigurative politics,
Hmm.
and understanding that there is no one
One.
way
That's
this is
right.
supposed to go.
Hmm.
There's no one universal guideline, one plan. It's more over, like I said, it's a shift in perspective. It's
Hmm.
a basis that you're working from. And as long as you're working from that basis, then wherever you go, it is a viable answer.
Hmm.
So infinite experiment and frequent mistakes.
Hmm.
All of that is all a part of fine tuning what this is. So
And
yeah.
it's also and it's also a part of humanity to grow,
Mhm.
to learn, to make mistakes, to
Yeah,
learn,
all of
to
that is a part
experiment.
of
All of that,
the
all of that's a part
experience.
of the
Yeah,
experience.
so
Yes,
W.E.B. Du Bois in this chapter is not going to lay out a educational plan for you
right.
to implement in your school.
That's right.
Because that is, like I said, it depends on the students you're dealing with, the
Hmm.
environment that you're in, the temperament of your teacher and the
Right.
students and all that stuff. So there's no one plan for this.
Hmm.
What's being presented here is more like is a thesis. It
Hmm.
is a basis,
Right.
of it, as long as you're educating from this basis, from
Hmm.
trying to bridge this divide,
Hmm.
from trying to fix this social problem and
Hmm.
honestly
That's right.
confront the problems that we are dealing with and where they come from. As long as that is the basis
Hmm.
of whatever educational program you come up with, then it is viable, it
Right.
is valid, and is meant to be there. But if you're not doing
Right.
this, if you're not working from this basis of honesty, and confrontation with the veil, and truly talking about what the issues are and how they propagate, if that's not what you are doing,
Right.
then you are hindering.
Yeah, you're banning books.
Hmm.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah. So yeah,
Hmm.
let's continue. In a rough approximation, we may point out four varying decades of work in Southern education since the Civil War. From the close of the war until 1876 was the period of uncertain grouping and temporary relief. There were army schools, mission schools, and schools of the Freedmen's Bureau in chaotic disarrangement seeking system and cooperation. Then followed 10 years of constructive, definite effort toward the building of complete school systems in the South. Normal schools and colleges were founded for the freedmen and teachers trained there to man the public schools. There was the inevitable tendency of war to underestimate the prejudices of the master and the ignorance of the slave, and all seemed clear sailing out of the wreckage of the storm. Meantime, starting in this decade, yet especially developing from 1885 to 1895, began the Industrial Revolution of the South. The land saw glimpses of a new destiny and the stirring of new ideals. The educational system striving to complete itself saw new obstacles and a field of work ever broader and deeper. The Negro colleges, hurriedly founded, were inadequately equipped, illogically distributed, and of varying efficiency and trade and grade.
Hmm.
The normal and high schools were doing little more than common school work, and the common schools were training but a third of the children who ought to be in them, and training these too often poorly. At the same time, the white South, by reason of its sudden conversion from the slavery ideal, by so much the more became set and strengthened in its racial prejudice, and crystallized it into harsh law and harsher custom, while the marvelous pushing forward of the poor white daily threatened to take even bread and butter from the mouths of the heavily handicapped sons of the freedmen. In the midst, then, of the larger problem of Negro education sprang up the more practical question of work, the inevitable economic quandary that faces a people in the transition from slavery to freedom, and especially those who make the change amid hate and prejudice, lawlessness, and ruthless competition. The industrial schools springing to notice in this decade, but coming to full recognition in the decade beginning with 1895, was the proffered answer to this combined educational and economic crisis, and an answer of singular wisdom and timeliness. From the very first, in nearly all the schools, some attention had been given to training in handiwork, but now was this training first raised to indignity that brought it in direct touch with the South's magnificent industrial development, and given an emphasis which reminded black folk that before the temple of knowledge swing the gates of toil. Yet after all, they are but gates. And when turning our eyes from the temporary and the contingent in the Negro problem to the broader question of the permanent uplifting and civilization of black men in America, we have a right to inquire, as this enthusiasm for material advancement mounts to its height, if after all the industrial school is the final and sufficient answer in the training of the Negro race, and to ask gently, but in all sincerity, the, the ever recurring query of the ages, is not life more than meat, and the body more than raiment? And men ask this today all the more eagerly because of sinister signs in recent educational movements. The tendency is here, born of slavery and quickened to renewed life by the crazy imperialism of the day, to regard human beings as among the material resources of a land to be trained with an eye single to future dividends. Race prejudices which keep brown and black men in their places, we are coming to regard as useful allies with such a theory, no matter how much they may dull the ambition and sicken the hearts of struggling human beings. And above all, we daily hear that an education that encourages aspiration, that sets the loftiest of ideals and seeks as an end culture and character rather than breadwinning, is the privilege of white men and the danger and delusion of black. Stop right here to the session right
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Like I said, we see this today, where people like you know, if you take away all the hardships of poverty and all the hardships of being poor and having to fight for life, then nobody's going to want to work.
Yeah, everybody's going to be lazy, looking
Everybody's
for a
going to be
handout.
lazy. No, you need to have these things around, to give the people the oomph to actually work. And like I said, with no regard for what poverty actually does to a person mentally and physically. No regard to the cost that this struggle and these aspirations that you want to give to people is actually coming at.
Yeah.
The consequences.
Look at the cost of what it is to be of what it is to be poor, to be in that constant state of struggle. They're not even living. They're not. First of all, we already know that they're not treated as full-fledged human beings. They don't even have. There isn't life there, and so
life has become aspirational.
Right.
To attain life, you have to work.
Right.
You have to, make a good paycheck and all this stuff, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, because like I said, you go to work every day, and you're still not happy, and you're still not even having your needs met.
And then the final sentence here, where he talks about how the lofty ideas of education seem to be reserved for whites, and precluded, from blacks. I would say even in that day, it's not all whites that get to aspire for these higher goals.
Right.
You got children dying in factories during this time. This is before unions.
Right.
Before this stuff, and police was created to safeguard rich white people's property. That meant us as slaves, and them factories too, that y'all were trying to unionize. Yeah, police was leveled against y'all as much as it was against us.
Yeah.
So you are on the outs as well. You can't truly aspire and attain your goals, right? You can't truly get there. But all you can see is our movement, and how it's coming at the cost, quote unquote, of your position. And I think we talked about yesterday, about what this gap is. What is the wealth gap? What is the actual gap here? And it's like you said, it's not money. You can't we can't spend our way out of
Right.
out of racism.
hmm
You know, we could all every black person could still be rich.
Right.
All of us could have billions
Millions
of
of
dollars
dollars. Right.
to our name.
hmm
When you get pulled over by a police officer
You're
and you
right.
feel that tightness in your chest,
That's right. You know the deal.
that's what it is.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
Money ain't gonna fix that.
Right.
So what
We
this
know this,
issue
right,
is,
right.
it's not wealth.
Mhm.
Wealth is an element of it,
Definitely.
right? But it's not wealth. And
Right.
like we talked about yesterday and discussing this.
Right.
I said I think that this gap, this divide between us, it lies in the fact that we cannot truly see each other.
hmm
That we can't truly recognize that we're all in the same place.
hmm
We can't recognize, black people, I mean.
Right.
Black people cannot recognize the struggle of being white because all we see is the privilege,
hmm
right? And white people can't recognize the struggle of being black
Mhm.
because all they see is the oppression,
hmm
right? And what that means for them.
Right.
It's all personal things and we can't see each other because we're all in each other's way.
hmm
And I've said before that black people cannot escape the oppression of being black, cannot escape the hardship of being black. And white people cannot resist the luxury of being white.
hmm The privileges that come.
The privileges that come
comes
with
with
it.
that. Right.
Like I said, the wealth gap is big. You may be better off than us,
Right.
but you are not better off. You are
That's
still
obvious.
poor.
That is obvious. Right.
You can tell by all your marching. You're still
Right.
angry. You're
Right.
still, you're still looking at us. We
Right.
ain't got it. And it's like, at some point, we have to admit
hmm
that the privilege of being white comes at too high of a cost.
hmm
Right? We've already admitted that our oppression
Yeah,
is too
because
much.
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So we need to be able to reconcile these things. But the thing is that when these, like I said, these lofty ideals get married
Mhm.
to the pursuit of wealth, all you see is the privilege. All you see is the cost.
That's right.
All you see is the cost. So no one is actually willing to take a step back and recognize that we're all being screwed over.
hmm
That it's not working for any of us.
Right.
I said, how is it possible for there to be poor
White people. Right.
when there's slavery?
Correct.
When you are
Right.
literally not paying,
Right.
a majority
Right.
a majority of your workers.
Mhm.
How is it that there's still poverty then?
Right.
Then,
Yep.
when people literally were being brought over here as cattle
Right.
to not be
paid.
you still have
Had poor,
poverty.
yep. Still had poor white
How
people.
is that
How is it
even-
even possible?
We know why.
Of course. Right.
And now this argument, now this divide
hmm
is still being based on this pursuit of wealth.
Right. And to take it,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the things like LBJ, talking to president here,
Mm-hmm.
had mentioned, right, the president here has said is that, as we can literally pickpocket the white man, basically, as long as we keep his energies and focus on us,
On black people.
on black people. We could just take everything from. Look at Amazon, the Walmarts, and all of these. Look at the workers. Look at the folks who are out there, protesting about, a fair wage and all of that stuff. It's not just black folks out there who are complaining about Jeff Bezos.
Mm-hmm. It's all of us.
It's all of us.
But then,
But you can
when
always.
the question of the cost comes in,
That's right.
who's going to have to pay for it? Who's going to have to do the thing? Then it all breaks down.
That's right.
It all breaks down.
Right. And like you said, how is it that in the system of enslavement that you would still have poor white people when there's an entire group class spread across that's not being paid a single dime, nothing.
You were being lied to even
then.
Taking advantage.
But the thing is that you're not a slave,
yeah,
right? And so you don't have to worry about the patrols.
You don't have to worry about
Right.
your children being taken.
That's right. You don't have to worry about it. Right. Because
being raped and murdered.
Right.
You're not gonna worry about these
Right.
things.
There's no separation of your family. None of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you just make a nickel over us or whatever. However they
You
set it
still
up.
just make a nickel.
Yeah. Period.
This is like you said, when y'all were working at, you were getting wafers,
Yeah. Coupons.
so you could buy food at factory,
Factory owners.
sponsored
Yeah.
stores. And then, like you said, when the factory goes away, when the jobs go away, you don't got no food now.
Yeah.
That was going on,
And you still had to pay.
and you still had to pay
to stay there.
to stay there.
What? Yeah, that wasn't us.
That wasn't us.
That wasn't us.
That was y'all.
That's what they were doing to y'all. But you want. But what did they do? They turned your energies on us.
Because like the ideals
Right.
of freedom and liberty have been married and perverted by the pursuit of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
These two things cannot exist together.
Right. We know what this enslavement.
Mm-hmm.
We know what capitalism. We know what it has cost us.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't even engage in the idea of what it even costs them. They can't even engage into the idea of what it costs them because they're so focused on or maintaining this, and they believe that they have to share something with us. Those poor whites, middle class, whatever it is, they feel like they have to share something with us versus taking from the billionaire.
Versus realizing that you're already sharing with us.
Yeah.
You're already in poverty with us.
Right.
The aesthetic may be different for you. Of course, it's going to be
different
for you. That's the point.
That's the point.
But
right.
You are down here with us.
That's right.
Right? And like we said, the police is leveled against y'all like it's us.
Right.
It's not systemic racism.
Right.
It's not systemic racism for y'all.
Mm-hmm.
For y'all, it's poverty.
Right.
But
for us, it's different. Right.
Yeah, but you're
still under that boot nonetheless.
Under the boot. So can we please come to a place where we can recognize that in each other?
Mm-hmm.
That's the
but
work.
Again,
that's the honest
work.
Discussion.
That's the honest work.
And like just reading and seeing this here is like, like the WB, like he could take a step further. He goes even further. Like he's even more right than even he could see in that moment. So yeah, let's continue. Especially has criticism been directed against the former educational efforts to aid the Negro. In the 4 periods I have mentioned, we find first boundless, plainless enthusiasm and sacrifice, then the preparation of teachers for a vast public school system, then the launching and expansion of the school system amid increasing difficulties, and finally the training of workmen in the new and growing industries. This development has been sharply ridiculed as a logical anomaly and flat reversal of nature. Soothingly, we have been told that the first industrial and manual training should have taught the Negro to work. Then simple schools should have taught him to read and write. And finally, after years, high and normal schools could have completed the system as intelligence and wealth demanded. That a system logically so complete was historically impossible, it needs but a little thought to prove. Progress in human affairs is more often a pull than a push, surging forward of the exceptional man, and the lifting of his duller brethren slowly and painfully to his vantage ground. Thus, it was no accident that gave birth to universities centuries before the common schools that made fair Harvard the first flower of our wilderness. So in the South, the mass of the freedmen at the end of the war lacked the intelligence so necessary to modern working men. They must first have the common school to teach them to read, write, and cipher, and they must have higher schools to teach teachers for the common schools. The white teachers who flocked south went to establish such a common school system. Few held the idea of founding colleges. Most of them at first would have laughed at the idea, but they face, as all men since them have faced, that central paradox of the South, the social separation of the races. At that time, it was the sudden volcanic rupture of nearly all relations between black and white in work and government and family life. Since then, a new adjustment of relations in economic and political affairs has grown up, an adjustment subtle and difficult to grasp, yet singularly ingenious, which leaves still that frightful chasm at the color line across which men pass at their peril. Thus, then and now, there stand in the South 2 separate worlds, and separate not simply in the higher realms of social intercourse, but also in church and school, on railway and streetcar, in hotels and theaters, in streets and city sections, in books and newspapers, in asylums and jails, in hospitals and graveyards. There is still enough of contact for large economic and group cooperation, but the separation is so thorough and deep that it absolutely precludes for the present between the races anything like that sympathetic and effective group training and leadership of the one by the other, such as the American Negro and all backward peoples must have for effectual progress.
I'm just saying,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the university came first.
Higher
Higher
educational
education
aspirations came before.
for your common schools and
Mhm.
things like that. But for us,
Now you got to put the
no, you want to put the common school,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like, that's not how this works. And to go back to, I think, the two previous essays or chapters,
Mhm.
you know, where he mentions that when you talk about this, this is something from the pharaohs,
Mhm.
you know, all the way down to
It's
now.
time tested.
It's time tested. The university, that higher thing, that comes first.
Mhm.
How are you going to have your common schools? How are you going to have these things if you don't have folks trained? How are you going to train them? You can't train them in a common school. You have to train them up there.
Mhm.
So that's what he's saying, is that, you know, for you all
To learn how to teach,
to
get
learn
a
how
higher
to,
educational aspirations.
experiences, that's how you have to
Being
do
a
it.
workman and teaching a workman are two separate things.
Things. And for some strange reason, it's not a strange
Some
reason.
strange reason.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
Mhm.
you felt like you needed to reverse that.
And put the cart before the
Yeah,
horse.
and you wonder why you have the results that you have. It's amazing that, well, he's going to get,
Mhm.
it's amazing that we have any kind of progress
Mhm.
in this, and I'm using progress in quotations here, because of how all of this was set up after in the
Mhm.
South. So, yeah.
This the missionaries of 68 soon saw, and ineffective industrial and trade schools were impracticable before the establishment of a common school system, just as certainly no adequate common schools could be founded until there were teachers to teach them. Southern whites would not teach them. Northern whites in sufficient number could not be had. If the Negro was to learn, he must teach himself. And the most effective help that could be given him was the establishment of schools to train Negro teachers. This conclusion was slowly but surely reached by every student of the situation until simultaneously, in widely separated regions, without consultation or specific plan, there arose a series of institutions designed to furnish teachers for the untaught. Above the sneers of critics at the obvious defects of this procedure must ever stand its own crushing rejoinder. And what?
You said on. One is
Yeah.
I have one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's one crushing rejoinder.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Keep going.
In a single generation, they put 30,000 black teachers in the South. They wiped out the illiteracy of the majority of the black people of the land, and they made Tuskegee possible. Such higher training schools tended naturally to deepen broader development. At first, they were common in grammar schools. Then some became high schools. And finally, by 1900, some 34 had 1 year or more of studies of college grade. Studies
of college
grade.
Mm-hmm.
This development was reached with different degrees of speed in different institutions. Hampton is still a high school, while Fisk University started her college in 1871 and Spelman Seminary about 1896. In all cases, the aim is identical: to maintain the standards of the lower training by giving teachers and leaders the best practicable training, and above all, to furnish the black world with adequate standards of human culture and lofty ideals of life. It was not enough that the teachers of teachers should be trained in technical normal methods. They must also, so far as possible, be broad-minded, cultured men and women to scatter civilization among a people whose ignorance was not simply of letters, but of life itself.
You have to understand here that you're talking about now educating a populace
Mm-hmm.
who were enslaved, meaning that any knowledge of just being a person
Mm-hmm.
was taken from them.
Was perverted.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
and taken from them. So now that has to be reestablished. They have to they have to they have to be people again. And so this idea of the
just train them
train them how to work is utterly ridiculous. There are no people who doesn't know how to work like black people.
Mm-hmm.
We know work. That's the thing that we know. It was savagely and ravagely put into us.
Mm-hmm.
So we know work. The thing is that now we have to be free
We
to
have to
be
learn to be
people.
people again. You
And
know.
that come and so just like you had to quote unquote learn to be a slave,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now you have to learn to be a person, to be a human being. That's what's being
Mm-hmm.
addressed here.
And a lot of the one of the biggest casualties of
Mm-hmm.
slavery was the loss of that cultural self.
That's right.
We were forced to evolve in this new place, in
Mm-hmm.
this new, social strata, in this new perceptual basis of
Mm-hmm.
what a person is, or even question our own humanity,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And all of that knowledge of self that we had, you know, in Africa and in our own lands, in
Mm-hmm.
our own, time,
Right.
was made inert,
Mm-hmm.
was made irrelevant. You know, was taken away, was perverted
Mm-hmm.
by our new circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's like having to learn to read again.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you forgot your own language.
Right.
You forgot yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so now the biggest thing that needs to be done is the reassertion of this self.
Right.
Not, not for, to learn how to work, but literally just to be able to see yourself again
That's
as
right.
a person. To see it, to know that you do have a culture.
Mm-hmm.
You have these things. That's why a lot of this stuff is very important
Mm-hmm.
to this very day
Mm-hmm.
for Black people to hear, to see, that we were a people before slavery,
Mm-hmm.
that we have a culture, we had an identity, we have these things.
Mm-hmm.
We have our own history, we
Mm-hmm.
have our own troubles.
Mm-hmm.
All of the things that come along with being a people that
Right.
existed before
Mm-hmm.
this tumultuous event happened.
Right. We are a people who, the thing that happened with us, it's not so far fetched, because we even talked about, I think, with the Greeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they were
After the Bronze Age
collapsed, how like they literally forgot
their own language. They knew that they had a language, but they didn't know how to use it.
Right.
They couldn't read.
And so they had to.
That's when Odysseus
comes. And so
big stories.
The big story, and,
Mm-hmm.
and so they had to
relearn
that.
Mm-hmm.
This is like that's the hideous part of the enslavement. That taking away of the self,
mm-hmm.
the humanity, taking that away. And so now we're at a place where it has to be reestablished.
Say we have to learn.
We have to learn this again.
To learn our own language.
To learn our own culture. To learn our own language.
Mm-hmm.
To learn that we are a people.
Mm-hmm.
You understand me? And so, like we mentioned, this idea of just work. Nah, bro, that's not going to work. That's not going to work.
If you want people to work, they have to first be people.
Yeah.
It can thus be seen that the work of education in the South began with higher institutions of training, which threw off as their foliage common schools and later industrial schools, and at the same time strove to shoot their roots ever deeper toward college and university training. That was an inevitable and necessary development, sooner or later goes without saying, but there has been and still is a question in many minds if the natural growth was not forced, and if the higher training was not either overdone or done with cheap and unsound methods. Among white Southerners, this feeling is widespread and positive. A prominent Southern journal voiced this in a recent editorial.
Yeah.
The experiment that has been made to give the colored students classical training has not been satisfactory. Even though many were able to pursue the course, most of them did so in a parrot-like way, learning what was taught, but not seeming to appropriate the truth and import of their instruction, and graduating without sensible aim of valuable occupations for their future. The whole scheme has proved a waste of time, efforts, and the money of the state.
Man, look, that all. Well, yesterday it made us curse.
It made us very upset.
It made us. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
It's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
While most fair minded men would recognize this as extreme and overdrawn, still without doubt many are asking, are there a sufficient number of Negroes ready for college training to warrant the undertaking? Are not too many students prematurely forced into this work? Does it not have the effect of dissatisfying the young Negro with his environment? And do these graduates succeed in real life? Such natural questions cannot be evaded, nor on the other hand must a nation naturally skeptical as to Negro ability assume an unfavorable answer without careful inquiry and patient openness to conviction. We must not forget that most Americans answer all queries regarding the Negro a priori, and that the least that human courtesy can do is to listen to evidence.
Yeah. I'm not gonna use any profanity right now because I know you might want to listen to this, and if you're educated, you may want to share this episode with your students. So therefore, I'm going to avoid, using profanity at this particular junction. But how dare you? The audacity, like
To even have this
to even
mindset,
have this mindset, like, see,
to be naturally skeptical of
what?
yeah, you want skeptical when you
Yeah, you were skeptical when you were enslaving. Now all of a sudden,
oh, this is a huge waste
yeah,
of time.
this is a huge waste of time teaching them, culture and those type of things, because, well, like he says about, what are your priorities? Your priority is that we aren't a cultured people anyway, that we are the people.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, you would question.
It was parrot like, and they didn't really understand the deeper meanings.
Man, shut up.
You didn't understand the deeper meanings.
Yeah,
If you did, you wouldn't have done it.
See what I'm saying? See what I'm saying? Exactly.
Look, I know that, a lot is like, this is like 1903.
Uh-huh.
This is right out of slavery.
Uh-huh.
So you can see stuff like that. But the most annoying thing about all of this is that this mindset is still prevalent.
Yes.
It is still, people still have to deal with this.
Man, you still have people pushing bell curve theories or whatever about black people and intelligence and smaller brain, all this type of foolishness. You still have that.
It's like, to this, like, and it's like, this is
why the word
came old hat.
This
is old hat. Yep. And it's so tiring.
It is.
But seeing it here is like,
man, say, bro,
it is very. It's like, it's a gobsmack. Like,
mm-hmm.
how dare you? Who are you to even say?
See, like yesterday,
this is the bear.
That's right. We're clean off.
This is the bear. Right. But yeah, let's continue.
Yeah, let's continue.
The advocates of the higher education of the Negro would be the last to deny the incompleteness and glaring defects of the present system. Too many institutions have attempted to do college work. The work in some cases has not been thoroughly done, and quantity rather than quality has sometimes been sought. But all this can be said of higher education throughout the land. It is the almost inevitable incident of educational growth, and leaves the deeper question of the legitimate demand for the higher training of Negroes untouched. And this latter question can be settled in but one way, by a first-hand study of the facts. If we leave out of view all institutions which have not actually graduated students from a course higher than that of a New England high school, even though they be called colleges, if then we take the 34 remaining institutions, we may clear up many misapprehensions by asking searchingly, what kind of institutions are they? What do they teach? And what sort of men do they graduate? And first, we may say that this type of college, including Atlanta, Fisk and Howard, Wilberforce and Lincoln, Biddle, Shaw, and the rest, is peculiar, almost unique. To the shining trees that whisper before me as I write, I catch glimpses of a boulder of New England granite, covering a grave which graduates of Atlanta University have placed there with this inscription: in grateful memory of their former teacher and friend, and of the unselfish life he lived, and the noble work he wrought, that they, their children, and their children's children might be blessed. This was the gift of New England to the freed Negro. Not alms, but a friend; not cash, but character. It was not and is not money these seething millions want, but love and sympathy, the pulse of hearts beating with red blood. A gift which today only their own kindred and race can bring to the masses, but which once saintly souls brought to their favored children in the crusade of the 60s, that finest thing in American history, and one of the few things untainted by sordid greed and cheap vainglory. The teachers in these institutions came not to keep the Negroes in their place, but to raise them out of the defilement of the places where slavery had wallowed them. The colleges they founded were social settlements, homes where the best of the sons of the freedmen came in close and sympathetic touch with the best traditions of New England. They lived and ate together, studied and worked, hoped and hearkened in the dawning light. In actual formal content, their curriculum was doubtless old fashioned, but in educational power it was supreme, for it was the contact of living souls. From such schools, about 2,000 Negroes have gone forth with a bachelor's degree. The number in itself is enough to put at rest the argument that too large a proportion of Negroes are receiving higher training. If the ratio to population of all Negro students throughout the land in both college and secondary school be counted, Commissioner Harris assures us it must be increased to 5 times its present average to equal the average of the land.
It's amazing. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
try. You know, whenever the United States, particularly its military, right? When the United States military says we need 100 black pilots, amazingly, every rip they can find, train, get 100 black pilots. Whenever the military says we need 1,000 black nurses, amazingly, you could get, train, educate, find these 1,000 black nurses. But now all of a sudden, for some, it always seems as if it's always an impossible task. You know, why? Well, why aren't there enough? Why aren't there black doctors and scientists or engineers or professors or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
You have to make a concerted effort for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's on your end to get it. If you make the effort, don't clown. If you are intentional, you will get it. Simple as that. It's very simple. Slavery was intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you went across an entire ocean to maintain it. You were always able to find folk for that.
Mm-hmm.
But now with this, we're coming out of this enslavement. All of a sudden now,
we don't know.
We don't know,
Yeah,
or that you have to, you have retarded the process in order to even get it. Let's keep going.
50 years ago, the ability of Negro students in any appreciable numbers to master a modern college course would have been difficult to prove. Today, it is proved by the fact that 400 Negroes, many of whom have been reported as brilliant students, have received a bachelor's degree from Harvard, Yale, Oberlin, and 70 other leading colleges. Here we have the nearly 2,500 Negro graduates, of whom the crucial query must be made: how far did their training fit them for life? It is, of course, extremely difficult to collect satisfactory data on such a point, difficult to reach the men, to get trustworthy testimony, to gauge the testimony by any generally accepted criterion of success. In 1900, the conference at Atlanta University undertook to study these graduates and publish the results. First, they sought to know what these graduates were doing and succeeded in getting answers from nearly two-thirds of the living. The direct testimony was in almost all cases corroborated by the reports of the colleges where they graduated, so that in the main the reports were worthy of credence. 53% of these graduates were teachers, presidents of institutions, heads of normal schools, principals of city school systems, and the like. 17% were clergymen. Another 17% were in the professions, chiefly as physicians. Over 6% were merchants, farmers, and artisans, and 4% were in the government civil service. Granting even that a considerable proportion of the third unheard from are unsuccessful, this is a record of usefulness.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I know many hundreds of these graduates and have corresponded with more than 1,000. Through others, I have followed carefully the life work of scholars. I have taught some of them, and some of the pupils whom they have taught lived in homes which they have builded, and looked at life through their eyes. Comparing them as a class with my fellow students in New England and in Europe, I cannot hesitate in saying that nowhere have I met men and women with a broader spirit of helpfulness, with deeper devotion to their life work, or with more consecrated determination to succeed in the face of bitter difficulties than among Negro college bred men. They have to be sure of their proportions of ne'er-do-wells, their pedants and lettered fools, but they have a surprisingly small proportion of them. They have not that culture of manner which we instinctively associate with university men, forgetting that in reality it is the heritage from cultured homes, and that no people a generation removed from slavery can escape a certain unpleasant rawness and gaucherie, despite the best of training.
I mean,
Mhm.
you know, it's pretty self-explanatory there. What is it that you expect of a people one generation removed from enslavement?
The fact that you've gotten this much,
That you have this.
that you see this much, like I said, this record of usefulness.
That's right.
And like you said in that last sentence, a certain unpleasant rawness and gaucherie, despite the best of training.
Mm-hmm.
Because we didn't go to these schools to learn the artifice of gentlemanly behavior.
That's right.
We ain't come here to cover
Right.
up, to learn how to speak right,
Mm-hmm.
to speak good.
Mm-hmm.
That's not why we there.
Right.
We went there to learn how to be people again. To find the conviction within ourselves to attain,
Right.
any position in society outside of the one relegated to us.
Correct.
So no, there is that rawness. There's that gaucherie.
Right.
And it's only unpleasant to y'all. On
Yeah,
the outside,
yeah. For
looking,
us, right.
Looking for people to be something that they're not.
Not. Right.
So.
Yeah, for us, this. We're shocked that you even have well over half to be in a particular professions and things like that. It's shocking that you would have something like that. And the fact that, okay, well, we got folk who are, raw, but that's to be expected. We expect that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's you that I guess that wouldn't expect that. Well, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course. So yeah.
With all their larger vision and deeper sensibility, these men have usually been conservative, careful leaders. They have seldom been agitators, have withstood the temptation to head the mob, and have worked steadily and faithfully in 1,000 communities in the South. As teachers, they have given the South a commendable system of city schools and large numbers of private normal schools and academies. Colored college-bred men have worked side by side with white college graduates at Hampton. Almost from the beginning, the backbone of Tuskegee's teaching force has been formed of graduates from Fisk and Atlanta, and today the institute is filled with college students from the energetic wife of the principal down to the teacher of agriculture, including nearly half of the executive council and a majority of the heads of department. In the professions, college men are slowly but surely leavening the Negro church, are healing and preventing the devastation of disease, and beginning to furnish legal protection for the liberty and property of the toiling masses. All this is needful work. Who would do it if Negroes did not? How could Negroes do it if they were not trained carefully for it? If white people needed colleges to furnish teachers, ministers, lawyers, and doctors, do black people need nothing of the sort? If it is true that there are an appreciable number of Negro youth in the land capable by character and talent to receive that higher training, the end of which is culture, and if the 2,500 who have had something of this training in the past have in the main proved themselves useful to their race and generation, the question then comes, what place in the future development of the South ought the Negro college and college-bred man to occupy? That the present social separation and acute race sensitiveness must eventually yield to the influences of culture as the South grows civilized is clear. But such transformation calls for singular wisdom and patience. If while the healing of this vast sore is progressing, the races are to live in many years side by side, united in economic effort, obeying a common government sensitive to mutual thought and feeling, yet subtly and silently separate in many matters of deeper human intimacy. If this unusual and dangerous development is to progress amid peace and order, mutual respect, and growing intelligence, it will call for social surgery at once the delicatest and nicest in modern history. It will demand broad-minded, upright men, both white and black. In its final accomplishment, American civilization will triumph. So far as white men are concerned, this fact today is being recognized in the South, and a happy renaissance of university education seems imminent. But the very voices that cry hail to this good work are, strange to relate, largely silent or antagonistic to the higher education of the Negro.
I know who you're talking about here. First of all, you can't have separate but equal. Okay? Because if it's separate, right? Who laws of who laws do I have to abide by? Who laws do you have to abide by? Right? If it's separate,
Mm-hmm.
right? See, we already know that we're that in that type of structure, we still have to live by your laws, even though we don't have a right to vote on them, we
Mm-hmm.
don't construct them or do anything like that. We'll still have to live in the consequences of what you establish.
Mm-hmm.
However, you don't have to live in the consequences of what we establish, right? Because it's quote unquote separate, right? But you don't. But so how can it be equal
Mm-hmm.
if only if
If you make the laws,
if
you
you
dictate the systems, you
right
pass all the the legislature, and we just do nothing.
nothing and tell me that that's how this is supposed to work?
Well, you got a
Woo!
job,
Yeah, well, yeah,
and this
yeah.
next little part right here, I think
It's going
is
right.
going to pave all that. Strange to relate, for this is certain: no secure civilization can be built in the South with the Negro as an ignorant, turbulent proletariat. Suppose we seek to remedy this by making them laborers and nothing more. They are not fools. They have tasted of the tree of life, and they will not cease to think, will not cease attempting to read the riddle of the world. By taking away their best equipped teachers and leaders, by slamming the door of opportunity in the faces of their bolder and brighter minds, will you make them satisfied with their lot? Or will you not rather transfer their leading from the hands of men taught to think to the hands of untrained demagogues? We ought not to forget that despite the pressure of poverty, and despite the active discouragement of, and even ridicule of friends, the demand for higher training steadily increases among Negro youth. There were, in the years from 1875 to 1880, 22 Negro graduates from Northern colleges. From 1885 to 1890, there were 43. And from 1895 to 1900, nearly 100 graduates. From Southern Negro colleges, there were, in the same three periods, 140, 143, 413, and over 500 graduates. Here then is the plain thirst for training. By refusing to give this talented tenth the key to knowledge, can any sane man imagine that they will lightly lay aside their yearning and contentedly become hewers of wood and drawers of water? No. The dangerously clear logic of the Negro's position will more and more loudly assert itself in that day when increasing wealth and more intricate social organizations preclude the South from being, as it so largely is, simply an armed camp for intimidating black folk. Such waste of energy cannot be spared if the South is to catch up with civilization, and as the black third of the land grows in thrift and skill, unless skillfully guided in its larger philosophy, it must more and more brood over the red past and the creeping crooked present until it grasps a gospel of revolt and revenge and throws its newfound energies athwart the current of advance. Even today, the masses of the Negroes see all too clearly the anomalies of their position and the moral crookedness of yours. You may marshal strong indictments against them, but their counter cries, lacking though they be in formal logic, have burning truths within them which you may not wholly ignore. Oh, Southern gentlemen, if you deplore their presence here, they ask, who brought us? When you cry, deliver us from the vision of intermarriage, they answer that legal marriage is infinitely better than systemic concubinage and prostitution. If in just fury you accuse their vagabonds of violating women, they also in fury quite as just may reply the wrong which your gentlemen have done against helpless black women in defiance of your own laws is written on the foreheads of 2 millions of mulattoes and written in ineffaceable blood.
I have the word rape in my
And
book.
finally, when you fasten crime upon this race as its peculiar trait, they answer that slavery was the arch crime, and lynching and lawlessness is twin abortion. That color and race are not crimes, and yet they it is which, in this land, receive most unceasing condemnation, north, east, south, and west.
I mean, pretty straightforward here.
Mhm. If you say
Mm-hmm.
that black people, or just people in general,
Mm-hmm.
need to go to school, need to get a
Get a good
degree,
education, right?
get a
Right.
good job, and do all these things. And these people do all the things that you say that they're supposed to do,
Mm-hmm.
and still find the door of opportunity being closed in their face. Still have to deal with this veil, this iron curtain, still are being relegated to being second-class citizens after they do all this work. In what world? How can you possibly imagine them not to, ferment a social strife? How can you imagine anything but? You think that they're just going to, like I said, that they're just going to lightly lay aside their yearning and contently become hewers of wood and drawers of water? You think they're going to shut up? That they're not going to want more? Or do you think that in your hastening to create this social inferiority, that you don't in and of itself create the type of social strife that you are so afraid of, that you want to rail against?
Yeah, you look, all of these problems that you say are problems, you brought them yourself. You literally brought them yourself. That's what he says. Who brought us? Who brought us here? We were over there. You brought us over here. You did that. You talk about, our men, being vagabonds or now, they're going to get educated and think they can get white women. I'm sorry, but you raped.
Mm-hmm.
And your crime is ever present. Over 2 million mulattoes.
Frederick
Douglass. Booker T. Washington himself.
Mm-hmm.
Your crime is present here. How dare you? No. Okay? And then, like you mentioned, we do all of these things. And still, north, south, east, and west, racism, the veil that we are being denied.
The personhood.
We
worked so hard to attain. And that we know we have attained. Now we know, that we didn't even have to work to get it.
Right.
That we were born with it.
That's right.
And it is you who refuse to acknowledge that. It is your systems that refuse to acknowledge that. Your implementation, it's you. Right? What else, what do you think that's going to cause other than social strife? Like you said right here. Will you not rather transfer their leading from the hands of men taught to think to the hands of untrained demagogues?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is going to happen?
Right.
When you constantly shut that door, people, you create that ferment. You create that strife because you aren't holding up your end of the bargain.
Mm-hmm.
People are doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing in droves, ever increasingly. So he just proved it with the numbers.
Right. The idea that we're going to just shut up and do it's crazy.
In droves getting degrees. In droves following the roadmap. Doing all the things that a person is supposed to do. And they are still coming up against the veil. Still coming up against this racism. If you, don't open that door. If you don't give them the opportunity. Give them that space. The acknowledgement. That they need, then all you will do is continue to ferment this strife, is to continue to widen this divide. That's all you'll do. And like you say, you don't need graceful logic to be able to see the hypocrisy from your position. You brought us here.
Right.
You raped us. You committed the greatest crimes and continue to commit the greatest crimes on the face of this earth. Yet criminality is in our behavior.
Right.
And we're criminals. Right. And we're lazy and all this stuff. And it's like, this is ridiculous. You aren't holding up your end of the bargain. You are creating the strife. Because you can't resist the luxury of being white. That's what this is.
Yep.
Like we said, no need for interpretation now.
Yeah, right.
You don't gotta.
Yeah. No, that's it. That's all. Right.
Exactly what the man said. I will not say such arguments are wholly justified. I will not insist that there is no other side to the shield. But I do say that of the 9 millions of Negroes in this nation, there is scarcely one out of the cradle to whom these arguments do not daily present themselves in the guise of terrible truth. So I love that sentence. Because that's the thing that we do all the time.
Right.
When we're talking about us.
Right.
It's not like racism isn't real. It's not like this stuff isn't present, but we have to do all this. Blah, 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 blah. Right? It's the same thing he just did there.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not saying that you're not justified in feeling the way that you feel. But racism is a very present mental and physical danger that everyone has to exist in. He calls it, and I love it, It's the Dune terminology.
Right.
It's the Dune terminology.
Maybe Frank Herbert got it from him.
Terrible
Truth.
truth. It's terrible truth.
Mhm.
I love it. I love it. I insist that the question of the future is how best to keep these millions from brooding over the wrongs of the past and the difficulties of the present, so that all their energies may be bent toward a cheerful striving and cooperation with their white neighbors toward a larger, juster, and fuller future. The one wise method of doing this lies in the closer knitting of the Negro to the great industrial possibilities of the South is a great truth. And this, the common schools and the manual training and the trade schools are working to accomplish. But these alone are not enough.
Mm-hmm.
The foundations of knowledge in this race, as in others, must be sunk deep in the college and university if we would build a solid permanent structure. Internal problems of social advance must inevitably come. Problems of work and wages, of families and home, of morals and the true valuing of the things of life, and all these and other inevitable problems of civilization the Negro must meet and solve largely for himself by reason of his isolation. And can there be any possible solution other than by study and thought and an appeal to the rich experience of the past? Is there not, with such a group and in such a crisis, infinitely more danger to be apprehended from half trained minds and shallow thinking than from over education and over refinement? Surely we have wit enough to found a Negro college so manned and equipped as to steer successfully between the dilettante and the fool. We shall hardly induce black men to believe that if their stomachs be full, it matters little about their brains. They already dimly perceive that the paths of peace winding between honest toil and dignified manhood call for the guidance of skilled thinkers. The loving, reverent comradeship between the black lowly and the black men emancipated by training and culture. The function of the Negro College then is clear. It must maintain the standards of popular education. It must seek the social regeneration of the Negro, and it must help in the solution of problems of race, contact, and cooperation. And finally, beyond all this, it must development above our modern socialism and out of the worship of the mass must persist and evolve that higher individualism which the centers of culture protect. There must come a loftier respect for the sovereign human soul that seeks to know itself and the world about it, that seeks a freedom for expansion and self development, that will love and hate and labor in its own way, untrammeled alike by old and new. Such souls for a time have inspired and guided worlds, and if we but not wholly bewitched by our Rhine gold, they shall again. Herein the longing of black men must have respect. The rich and bitter depths of their experience, the unknown treasures of their inner life, the strange rending of nature they have seen may give the world new points of view and make their loving, living, and doing precious to all human hearts and to themselves. In these the days that try their souls, the chance to soar in the dim blue air above the smoke is to their finer spirits boon and guerdon for what they lose on earth by being black. I sit with Shakespeare, and he winces not. Across the color line I move arm in arm with Balzac and Dumas, where smiling men and welcoming women glide in gilded halls. From out of the caves of evening that swing between the strong limbed earth and the tracery of the stars, I summon Aristotle and Aurelius, and what soul I will, and they come all graciously, with no scorn and condescension. So wed with truth, I dwell above the veil. Is this the life you grudge us, O knightly America?
Mm-hmm.
Is this the life you long to change into the dull red hideousness of Georgia? Are you so afraid of us peering from this high facade between Philistine and Amalekite? We sight the promised land.
That's what y'all scared of. Who? y'all, you're you're afraid of a thinking black man, of a
Black people.
people. That's what scares you. The thought of them even thinking of themselves as a people is driving you all insane. And for any one of us to think that we should only be relegated to just hewing wood.
Mm-hmm.
No. Absolutely no. No.
No, as in it is naturally,
Right.
by every measure, impossible to expect a people to just stay in a position forced upon them.
Right.
people will naturally want more.
And they should be given the opportunity
Opportunities.
and the space for it.
Mhm.
If you want to become a bricklayer, if that's what you truly want to do,
There's no problem in
there
it.
is absolutely no problem in that. There is no shade and no crime in that. And I think there's been this conflating of the talented 10th,
Mhm.
of what W.E.B. Du Bois even means by that. It's not at the cost or the behest of the worker.
Mhm.
You need you need to have that. The talented 10th is not just, I'm just in the philosophy in the books or whatever. That's not just, but it's been reduced to that.
Mhm.
And that's been an argument for, I don't know,
The talented
you
10
know,
is a people of means
right.
who are able to use the means at their disposal, all of their means.
Mhm.
Like I said, from the scholar to the blacksmith,
Right.
all of their means to lift themselves and their people to a better position. That's what that means.
Right.
That's what that is.
Mhm.
And there are going to be people, men and women, who are better capable at being able to do that than others. And
Right.
those people should be in the position of leading the way and helping to guide us forward.
Right. I mean, this is not anything that's controversial.
Mhm.
We, as far as I'm concerned, Dr. John Henry Clarke is a talented 10.
Mhm.
He's in there. He is one of our greatest intellectual minds. And so are our construction workers
Mhm.
and our builders. They have an expertise that Dr. John Henry Clarke would never have.
Mhm.
They are experts and talented in that particular field. We need all of those. All of our experts. It's not the talent. Talented 10th is not just, the philosopher.
Mhm.
That's not,
A intellectual conversation.
no. We have, the talented are our engineers and
It's the
doctors and
people
lawyers.
of
It's the people.
needs.
It's the people of needs. And we are going to have those who flourish in all those particular fields. We need to lean on their expertise in that. So I just felt like I needed to get that part,
Mhm.
straightened out in regards to that talented 10th stuff. In regards to also what we just read here, is that when you allow a people to be a people, okay, they can choose for themselves. In the avenue of what I'm gonna say, a Booker T. Washington, all of these are all lead, is that you are not being given a choice in that space.
Mhm.
You are just the worker. You don't have any rights. There is no, there's this idea of separate but equal. It's totally insane. That makes no sense. All of the laws are still being imposed upon you. When is it that you are equal?
Mhm.
You're not. You're still being relegated. You're still the subject and at the mercy of
Mhm.
of an of another. So that's the thing that I found, fascinating. Well,
Yeah.
in
And
this particular lecture.
in conclusion,
Mm-hmm.
Black people have the drive to be college graduates.
Mm-hmm.
They have the drive, they have the expertise, they have all the things that they need
Mm-hmm.
within themselves. But on the outside, on those things that they can't provide themselves is the camaraderie. It is the love and the sympathy and empathy of the world at large.
Mm-hmm.
That plays a very big part in guiding us. We need to be in that environment where our humanity is recognized and reinforced.
And respected, because he used the word
Mhm.
respect. Mm-hmm.
These things must be there. We have to learn to be people again. We
Mm-hmm.
have to learn to, recognize our cultural selves and understand those things that are pulling at that
Mhm.
contribute to making that.
Mm-hmm.
From then on all the way to now, these things are prevalent. And when all of that is done, there also must be the space given for us to flourish.
Mm-hmm.
The door can't be closed in our face. We must be given the opportunities. We must be given these things.
Mm-hmm.
If you want us to succeed, if you are looking for us to succeed, then all of that must be in place. The environment and the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is crucial to this. And as long as you have the school, but you're not respecting, or the cultural self,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you go through school, you get a degree, but now you have no opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you get the opportunity to have all these things, but you have the debt and the economic detritus
Mm-hmm.
of a system that will not pay you and will not give you the things that you need to truly and fully thrive. All of these stopgaps, as long as it's this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you're never going to get anything but what you are seeing now,
Mm-hmm.
from both within and without the veil.
It has been a hefty cost.
Mm-hmm.
We know what it has cost us. I don't think that across that they look at it, well, what is it that it has cost you all?
Mm-hmm.
Because it has cost us. And so,
So
yeah.
yeah, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments, and thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you.